Have you ever imagined what really happened behind the gates of a convent? The peaceful image of nuns praying in silence may seem like a sanctuary of purity and faith. But what if I told you that behind this facade lurked terrifying secrets? Cruel rules, inhumane punishments, and an isolation that led to madness were just some of the harsh realities many women faced. What happened to those young girls who, filled with dreams, were forced to enter these places? How did they survive? And what happened to those who tried to escape? Today you will uncover the hidden truth about convents, and I can guarantee you, this story is not for the faint of heart. Stay with me until the end, because what you are about to hear may completely change the way you see these institutions. Convents emerged centuries ago, supposedly as places of retreat and devotion, where women could dedicate themselves to faith, far from the temptations of the world. However, what began as an ideal of purity quickly became a prison for many. In the past, families often sent their daughters to the convent not because of religious vocation, but to hide scandals, avoid marriage dowries, or simply because they didn't want another mouth to feed. For noble families, having an unmarried daughter was seen as a failure, and instead of allowing her to marry beneath her status, they preferred to lock her away in a convent. For poorer families, it was an escape from financial burdens, as the convent could provide food and shelter without the need for a costly dowry. Many of these girls were mere children, torn from their homes and condemned to a life they never chose. Inside these convents, women's lives took a dark turn. They lost their identity, their hair was cut, their clothes were taken, and any connection to their former lives was erased. It didn't matter if they had entered by choice or by force, their fate would be the same: isolation, blind obedience, and a life of suffering. Despite all the suffering, the superiors of these places, the Mothers Superior, were highly respected in society. They were seen as virtuous women, wise and devoted to God, often wielding immense power within religious and political circles. Their influence extended beyond the convent walls, and many came from noble families, using their status to gain privileges and control. However, not all of them lived up to the saintly image they portrayed. Some were cruel, merciless, and utterly devoid of compassion. The absolute power they held over the nuns created an environment where abuse and corruption flourished unchecked. Life inside convents was not just about prayers and reflection. The day began before dawn, and the nuns were forced to endure exhausting routines of manual labor. Many spent hours embroidering, sewing, or washing clothes without rest. Silence was mandatory, and any violation of this rule resulted in severe punishment. Some were forced to spend entire days kneeling on cold stone floors, while others were subjected to prolonged fasting that left them on the brink of collapse. And then there was the cruelest punishment of all: the cilis. This torture device, a metal chain with sharp points, was worn on the body so that the constant pain could serve as a form of purification. Suffering was seen as a path to God, but in reality, it only destroyed the minds and bodies of these women. Many nuns began to lose their sanity within these walls. The isolation, the repression of emotions, and the lack of normal human interaction transformed them. Some started seeing visions, hearing voices, or entering trance-like states. What many believed to be divine manifestations were, in reality, clear signs of psychological breakdown. There were cases where entire convents descended into mass hysteria, with nuns screaming, crying, and convulsing without any apparent explanation. In one convent in France in the 17th century, dozens of nuns claimed to be possessed by demons, and the exorcisms performed only made the situation worse. But not all the madness was supernatural. Many of these women, trapped in a system of oppression, grew resentful, manipulative, and even sadistic. Some Mothers Superior became ruthless, enjoying the control they had over the younger nuns, taking pleasure in their suffering, and ensuring that no one dared to challenge their rule. The harsh conditions inside the convents didn't just affect the minds of the women, but also their bodies. The lack of nutrition, poor living conditions, and constant punishment made many nuns physically frail and ill. Malnutrition was common, and many women developed illnesses that could have been easily treated if they had access to proper care. But the convent was isolated from the world, and those who dared to complain about their health were seen as weak or unspiritual. They were often ignored or subjected to more punishment, and some in their weakened state did not survive. Their bodies were buried in unmarked graves, and their suffering was forgotten by the world. And escape? Escaping was nearly impossible. To the outside world, these women ceased to exist the moment they entered the convent. Anyone who dared to flee was brutally punished. Some were locked in small, dark cells where they spent weeks or even months without seeing daylight. Others were chained and forced to pray for days on end without rest. There are reports of nuns who simply vanished as if they had never existed. Some were secretly buried in the convent gardens, while others were left to die in locked rooms with no food, no water, and no hope. Those who did manage to escape often had nowhere to go. They were branded as traitors or mentally unstable, and society shunned them, leaving them to live in fear for the rest of their lives. But why does living this way make people even worse? The answer lies in God's own creation. From the very beginning, God designed human beings to live in community, to form relationships, to love and be loved. Extreme isolation goes against this nature. The Bible shows that marriage, family, and interpersonal relationships are part of God's divine purpose for humanity. When someone is deprived of this, their mind begins to deteriorate. The lack of affection, purpose, and freedom does not purify the soul. It only destroys the spirit. Many convents failed in their attempt to turn women into saints through suffering, when in reality they were only destroying what God had planned for them. And there are even more terrifying stories. It is said that in an isolated convent, a nun named Sister Helena was locked alive in the basement after being accused of treason. She had discovered a dark secret about the convent's superiors and threatened to expose it to the world. As punishment, she was condemned to oblivion. For months, the other nuns heard her muffled screams through the walls, until one day, silence took over the convent. Her body was never found, but many swore her presence never left that place. Doors creaked open on their own, whispers echoed through the empty hallways, and sometimes a pale shadow was seen wandering through the chapel. Some nuns who spent nights in that convent said that, as night fell, a sorrowful voice pleaded for help. "Please, let me out," were the last words whispered before everything fell silent once again. Now stop and think. How many of these stories have been hidden over the centuries? How many women suffered in silence, forgotten by the world? Convents may have been built, with the promise of peace and spirituality, but for many they were nothing more than prisons of torture and despair. These women were often denied their basic human rights, their dignity and their freedom. They were reduced to mere shadows, their lives consumed by fear and pain. The silence surrounding their suffering speaks volumes about the power these institutions held over them. They were not just places of religious devotion, they were places of terror, where women were trapped in a never-ending cycle of torment. Many of the convents still stand today, their walls holding the memories of those who suffered within them. Some have been abandoned, while others have been repurposed or turned into tourist attractions. But even today, the stories of the women who lived and died within those walls remain largely untold. The hidden history of these convents serves as a stark reminder of the cruelty that can arise from unchecked power and the abuse of authority. It's a reminder that history is not always as pure and holy as it may appear on the surface. If this story shocked you, and you want to keep uncovering hidden truths like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There's much more to come and you won't want to miss it. Leave a like, comment on what you think and share this video so that more people can learn about this dark history. See you in the next video.